In the early 2000s, a highly educated, quiet graphic designer named Elena entered a serious relationship with a dominant, hyper-ambitious corporate attorney. In the initial months, the connection appeared flawless. Elena was praised by friends as the ultimate partner, completely supportive, endlessly patient, and entirely free of personal drama or demands. But beneath that peaceful, accommodating exterior lay a devastating psychological dissolution. Over a 5-year period, Elena's family noticed a chilling transformation. Elena completely stopped expressing her own opinions, abandoned her career ambitions inside her computer workspace, and altered her wardrobe, her music tastes, and her speech patterns to perfectly mirror her partner. If her partner was angry, she absorbed the blame. If he was cold, she overextended her energy to fix it. Elena was trapped in a severe, clinical state of echoism. This real-world case study exposed a profound, hidden trap within human dynamics. It proved that a relationship can be entirely destroyed not just by the overt cruelty of a narcissist, but by the absolute erasure of the self in the partner, turning an independent human being into a literal phantom echo that exists solely to validate another person's ego. This profound personality collapse is driven by a psychological mechanism known as compulsory echoism, operating through a structure called inverse narcissistic attachment. Originally conceptualized in clinical psychology through the myth of echo, the nymph cursed to only repeat the words of others. This framework describes an individual who carries a deep, subconscious terror of being perceived as narcissistic, selfish, or burdensome. Their ego cannot tolerate the internal anxiety of occupying space or projecting personal desires into the room. To protect themselves from the terrifying threat of rejection or abandonment, their mind executes an automated survival shift. It completely deletes their personal boundaries. They don't seek admiration. They seek total invisibility. They treat their own authentic voice, their independent needs, and their creative boundaries as dangerous liabilities that must be suppressed. They use their absolute compliance as a psychological shield, transforming their partner's ego into their sole emotional anchor, completely blinding themselves to reality simply to secure safety through total self-erasure. To understand why the echoism trap holds such an ironclad, paralyzing grip over human consciousness, we must look at the neurobiology of social compliance and the reward suppression networks. When modern neuroscientists place individuals with deep echoistic tendencies inside functional brain scanners and expose them to scenarios requiring self-assertion or personal choice, they observe an extraordinary neural block. In a healthy brain, expressing a personal preference activates the intrinsic reward centers of the ventral striatum. But in the echoistic brain, these pathways remain completely dark. Conversely, the exact second they attempt to voice a boundary, a rapid, intense wave of activity lights up the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, the neural network responsible for processing intense social guilt, fear of exclusion, and moral anxiety. Their biology pulls the plug on self-expression, treating independent thought as an immediate survival threat. Their nervous system experiences a massive rush of cortisol, forcing their conscious intellect completely offline, compelling them to choose immediate submission simply to quiet the somatic agony of standing out. When this intense neurochemical fear alarm fires during a conflict, the victim's subconscious mind deploys an aggressive psychological shield known as deflectionary compliance validation. This is an automated defensive maneuver where the echoistic brain actively internalizes all relationship friction, inventing false narratives about its own selfishness simply to protect the partner from criticism. The human ego cannot tolerate the destabilizing reality of recognizing that they are erasing their existence for a manipulator. To protect your pride from the terrifying realization that you are trapped in a system of absolute emotional servitude, your mind performs a catastrophic rationalization. It tells a comforting story. My partner isn't controlling. They are just incredibly passionate. My needs don't matter right now because their career is more important. Or if I am perfectly compliant, the relationship will remain safe. Notice how the mind weaponizes your own capacity for empathy to keep you completely blind to your own destruction, leaving your defense shields totally lowered while you act as a literal mirror for their ego. The primary weapon an echoist uses to reinforce their own mental prison is a process called counter-narcissistic tracking. During her 5-year relationship, Elena did not simply stay silent. Her predictive processing engine aggressively scanned her partner's micro-expressions, posture, and vocal tones to preemptively eliminate any potential conflict before it could manifest. The exact second her partner entered the room, her subconscious would run an automated audit of his mood, adjusting her entire personality to match his emotional baseline. This behavior is calculated with absolute precision to avoid the trauma of standing out, the clash between your private feelings and the reality of your performative compliance creates severe cognitive dissonance inside your brain. Your predictive processing engine is a pattern-seeking machine that demands safety above all else. By continuously erasing your boundaries to soothe the manipulator, your system turns an exhausting state of emotional vigilance into an act of noble love, choosing the misery of a solitary erasure today over the risk of facing their disapproval tomorrow. Alongside counter-narcissistic tracking, the echoistic mind utilizes a secondary, highly passive filter known as aesthetic self-deprivation. Once a person has fully committed to total invisibility, their subconscious transforms their entire environment into a blank space devoid of personal signature. They strip their computer workspace of personal items, refuse to make demands regarding finances, and actively push away compliments, praise, or recognition from the outside world. This filter alters their perception because it makes their self-erasure look like an act of superior spiritual humility and absolute maturity. Their selective attention filter ensures that their brain highlights the comfort of being entirely unblamed, while completely deleting the reality that they are living in a state of chronic emotional starvation. Self-deprivation transforms their relational landscape into a fortress of safety where nobody can ever accuse them of being selfish, completely shielding their ego from the terrifying reality that their refusal to occupy space is keeping them completely invisible inside their own life. These abstract biological filters manifest daily in devastating real-world loops, the most common of which is the trap of the shared narcissistic synergy. This is the precise reason why an echoist is magnetically drawn to high-conflict, narcissistic individuals in the workplace or home. A narcissist requires a completely hollow space to project their inflated ego, while the echoist requires a dominant anchor to project their compliance. The two mindsets lock together like a flawless, toxic puzzle piece. When a narcissist launches an irrational accusation in a corporate meeting or family dinner, Elena's echoism mechanisms trigger immediately. She does not defend her data or look to the crowd for support. Her brain registers the conflict as a literal survival emergency. She absorbs the blame publicly, entirely blind to the reality that her compliance is acting as the ultimate fuel to stabilize the predator's delusion. The relationship enters a perfectly stable, self-fulfilling loop of absolute dominance and absolute surrender, sliding down a slope of systemic degradation simply because the echoist chooses psychological erasure to conform to the crowd. We see this exact same self-sabotage playing out through the pattern of the resentment eruption trap. When an empathetic individual spends years absorbing the emotional garbage of a dominant environment, suppressing their authentic boundaries, and practicing total invisibility, their central nervous system eventually enters a state of absolute structural collapse and chronic exhaustion. The predictive tracking engine of their brain snaps under the weight of the unexpressed self. They cannot maintain the flawless mirror persona any longer. They experience a sudden, explosive outburst of weeping or rage, completely shocking their social circle. This is the exact data point the dominant partner's prediction engine uses to close the trap. The narcissist looks at the eruption, labels the echoist as unstable, dramatic, or mentally ill, and weaponizes the outburst to enforce deeper compliance or initiate a brutal discard. The victim is left completely ruined, entirely validating their brain's dark belief that expressing a personal need is a dangerous, cataclysmic act that results in total abandonment, locking the loop forever. When this collective echoism and boundary erasure scales up from an individual relationship to a societal level, it produces the highly destructive phenomenon of passive compliance and ideological uniformity. A society enters a profound crisis of decay when its primary citizens become so terrified of being labeled problematic, selfish, or non-compliant that they voluntarily surrender their independent critical thought to a dominant narrative. Independent voice is treated as a literal social crime against the collective moral consensus. Mass echoism turns a population into a synchronized, unthinking herd that will gladly repeat sloganized lies and participate in the public shaming of dissenters, simply to protect the collective ego from the terrifying vulnerability of self-reflection. A civilization does not lose its freedom because it is overrun by external monsters. It slides into total tyranny because its most decent, peaceful citizens choose to become silent mirrors for loud, psychopathic ideologies, violently suppressing their own independent data to secure temporary safety inside the pack. The true danger of chronic echoism is that it constructs a perfectly closed, self-fulfilling cognitive loop that entirely blinds you to your own loss of personal sovereignty. The cycle begins the moment you face an aggressive personality or an unstable emotional environment. This high-stress environment creates immediate subconscious pressure to mirror their tone, forcing your brain to reduce activity in its self-assertive and logical networks. Because your internal boundaries are lowered by the fear of conflict, you choose total compliance, erasing your opinion or accepting an unearned blame. To clear the immediate wave of internal guilt, your mind instantly deploys deflectionary compliance validation, rewriting history to convince your conscious ego that staying invisible was an act of superior maturity and love. This failure to stand for your own truth is then used by your predictive engine as a new, acceptable baseline for the future. The loop closes perfectly, strengthening the neural pathways of moral blindness, transforming you into a passive shadow completely dependent on the crowd. Dismantling this matrix of self-erasure requires a rare, aggressive practice known as radical space occupation. You cannot think your way out of an echoism loop. Your brain's predictive processing engine demands hard, physical data points of independent defiance and voluntary friction to override its automated survival networks. This reprogramming begins by learning an extraordinary truth uncovered in clinical psychology. Experiencing conflict is not an act of cruelty. It is a fundamental requirement of human life. The next time you find yourself in an environment where your boundary is challenged or your data is questioned, do not look to the crowd for permission to speak. Recognize that your intense desire to fold your hands and stay silent is your subgenual cingulate cortex firing an early compliance alarm. Force your conscious mind to override the freeze. State your objective truth, voice your disagreement, and hold your ground with absolute calmness and clarity, refusing to apologize for your existence. By choosing to face the friction, you break the loop of your conditioning, providing an immediate data point that proves your voice is safe. Stepping out of the shadow of your compliance loops and choosing to occupy your own psychological space is an act of supreme heroism, because it forces you to face the raw neural pain of standing completely alone against a dominant crowd. Your brain will fight this process at every single turn, desperately screaming at you to drop your guard, mirror the herd, and accept the comfortable shared illusions of your invisibility simply to keep your ego safe from the agony of being seen. But now that you know the anatomy of the trap, now that you understand how your subconscious mind uses inverse attachment, counter-narcissistic tracking, and deflectionary validation to turn you into an unthinking echo, the fortress of your silence has lost its lock over your consciousness. You can choose to step out of the delusion and view your reality with absolute unyielding clarity. This navigation of your subconscious architecture is a lifelong education, and your brain utilizes dozens of other invisible neural mechanisms every single day to dictate your choices and trap you on autopilot without your consent. If you are ready to shatter the rest of these hidden mental loops, discover how your mind fakes reality, and unlock the true mechanisms of your subconscious, click on the playlist appearing on your screen right now. We have built an entire archive of long-form case studies and psychological deep dives designed explicitly to help you look past the self-delusions of your ego. Click through, explore the library, and take absolute control of your psychology.